February 2nd, 1995. The survivor is Mrs. Miriam Rabin. The interviewer is Diane Weinrich, and this interview is taking place in New Rochelle, New York, United States of America, in English.
That's very good. We have speed. We're rolling.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Miriam Rabin. I was born in Poland, in the town of Zalestyki, and it was near Tarnopol, which was the larger city. And I lived there with my parents and my siblings, my two sisters and a brother, until 1941. Actually, till 1939, we lived there it was Poland. And in 1939, this area was occupied by the Russians. And so from 1939 until 1941, we were under the Russian occupation. In 1941, the area was occupied by the Germans. And from 1941 till 1944, until I was liberated by the Russians, we lived there.
Would you tell us what life was like in your very earliest memories?
Well, my very earliest memories were wonderful. My childhood was a normal childhood in a happy family. I went to school. I had friends. I used to go summertime on vacation to visit relatives, and I attended the Polish public school and also the Hebrew school in the afternoon. I started from preschool, or what you would call here preschool, but it was actually kindergarten, and I went to Polish school from the age of 5 until 10. And then I continued, when the Russians came in, I continued in the Russian school until 41.
Were the Jews separate in any way in the schools? Did you feel separate from the Polish children?
I went to a public school and we were together. It was a girls' school. Boys and girls attended separate schools, and we attended school with a mixed Polish and Ukrainian and Jewish at the same time in the same schools. Of course, we Jewish kids always kept separately, even though we were friendly with the other kids, but my closest friends were Jewish. And we always felt the anti-Semitism in Poland.
Can you give an example of
the
earliest signs of anti-Semitism?
Definitely. The city that I come from was a resort place. It was on a river, and it was like Miami of Poland. It was the most southern spot in Poland. And people were coming for vacation during the summer because we also had a river and we had two beaches. One was the sunny beach, one was the shady beach. And it was really a lovely small town. But we had a lot of places where we were not allowed to go. And as a matter of fact, there were some stores on which had signs saying Jews and dogs are not allowed. And we knew that we should not walk on that street. So these were my earliest memories that anti-Semitism existed.
Were any of your teachers Jewish in your earliest schools?
Not well. we had religion was one of the subjects in school. So Jewish children were taught Jewish religion, and I know we had a Jewish teacher. But all the other subjects were taught by non-Jewish teachers. And I also know that I never reached that stage, but Jewish children were not had a quota to get into the high school. And so I know that my siblings went to a private business school, which was a Jewish school. The quota was like they allowed maybe 2 or 3 Jewish people to enter high school. So it was impossible to get a higher education for Jewish people.
And in the neighborhood that you lived in, was that primarily Jewish?
That was primarily Jewish, and it was mostly relatives that lived in the same area, in the same vicinity, and it was like, our house was like within a courtyard where everybody was a relative, either, you know, our aunts and uncles and cousins, and we all lived in the same area. There were some Jews that lived in other areas of the town, but most of us lived sort of congregated in certain areas, and primarily near the synagogues, which of course everybody attended, and it was within a walking distance from the home.
Your father's business?
My father was a businessman. He was in the grain business, and he dealt with farmers, you know, buying from them and selling. And so we had well, I have to say friends that were non-Jews, and they have helped us a lot, specifically one family that helped us a lot during the war with food, and also helped us to get out from our city when the time came to the ghetto. But
did your mother shop in Jewish stores, or did she shop in a general community?
Well, there were no supermarkets, that's for sure. And the shopping was done in there were small Jewish merchants that had stores, so that's where she used to shop. And there was also an open market every day. There were no refrigerators. We had electricity. We did not have plumbing like we have here. We have had outside plumbing. It was not not as easy living as it is, but we didn't know any better, any different, and it was fine. We were happy. We used to go to bathe in the river, I would say, rather than swim, because swimming was something that we were told not to do, because since it was a resort place and there were people coming from all over, there were several people almost every summer that used to drown in the river. So I grew up with that feeling, don't go near the water. And as a matter of fact, even since I came to the United States, I tried very hard to learn how to swim. And I've accomplished a little bit, but I'm still afraid of the water.
Were the children in Hebrew school taught to stay away from the Polish children?
Oh, no.
But there was anti-Semitism from the very beginning. How was that explained to the Jewish children?
It didn't have to be explained. We knew it. We felt it. I remember I had earrings, and I remember that I was a little girl, and that one of the Polish kids just came over to me and pulled the earring off my ear. Many times certain areas, I mean, not all Poles were like that, but there were enough in the city to make us feel uncomfortable. If we passed by certain areas, sometimes they would throw stones at us or just call your names. Just call your names, dirty Jew. And just made us feel that we were a lower class. But we always, in spite of everything, we lived a pretty comfortable, happy life. We lived within our own community, and again, not knowing any better, we thought that this was paradise.
How were the holidays celebrated in your home?
Oh, they were wonderful. It was always very festive. It was the house was always, especially for Passover. Used to be very excited. The house had to be spotless, and my parents were Orthodox. We were Orthodox, so. Naturally, for Passover, we would change dishes, and there was naturally no bread in the house, just matzahs, which were baked, hand-baked, not like with the machines like they are done here. And everything was done especially for the holidays, the baking and going to services, not as much as in a different way that we do it here, but as a child I was always very excited about the holidays. Those, like for Simchat Torah, they used to bring in a Torah into our house, and they used to read it in the house, and all the young people used to come in, because I had older siblings, 2 older sisters and a brother, and that was always a very exciting time for me, because I used to go around afterwards and serve everybody drinks and cakes and potato pancakes. It was just a happy time, the holidays.
Your brother and sisters lived in your home from your earliest memories, or
Yes.
What are your memories of them?
Yes, we all lived together until, and they were just wonderful. There was quite a difference in age between my siblings and myself, so I was like a toy to them, and I looked up to them, and I was just very, very, very happy.
Would you tell us
It
a
was a
little
happy
bit about
family.
each of your siblings?
Well, my older sister, she was just wonderful. She was beautiful. She was smart, and she was intelligent, and it was not, I'm not the one to say it, but everybody was saying this about her. And she had a lot of friends, and I was just, I always looked up to her. My younger sister was also, she was also pretty. She was more on the quiet side. My older sister was more outgoing. She liked to sing. She liked to have fun. She was a good dancer. She had a lot of boyfriends. My brother, he was just, he adored me, and I adored him. He was the only boy in the family, so everybody loved him. He was very good. And I remember when the Russians came in, and We didn't know how things were going to be. And he said that he's going to work and do whatever has to be done, but I have to go on to school. Because he felt that it was important. My parents felt, in my family, we all felt that education was very important. And it was so too, because you can have material things and you can easily lose them. I never realized that my parents had that experience from the First World War. But when education is something that no one can take away from you. So in our family, education was very much stressed. And they were just wonderful. My older sister was, during the war, I think she was teaching, and she was also working in an office, and so did my younger sister. My brother had to quit school, and he had to, he worked in a factory, I believe, during the time when the Russians came in.
Do you remember their weddings?
My older sister got married before the war, so that was a beautiful wedding. I mean, I was I think I was 9 years old, I think, and I was just so excited. I felt so proud and had a wonderful time. I vaguely remember it. But my younger sister got married already. The Russians were already in our area. So it was just a small wedding in the house. So that was not, it was just they wanted to get married, and they felt the war was on, and they didn't know what was going to happen, so they decided they wanted to get married. And my brother was not married. He was not married.
And did either of your sisters have children before
My older sister had a child within a year after she got married, and it was a little boy, and he was just precious. He was 3 years old when he was killed.
Did they live near you?
Yes, both my sisters. In Poland before the war, this was the normal thing, You didn't go to live in another. And the men that they married were from our town too. So we all lived within a walking distance from each other. And
What kind of work did your brothers-in-law do?
Pardon?
What kind of work did you
My one was an electrician, and the other one was also a businessman in the grain business, the older sister's husband, yes.
When the Russians came, what was, how did you learn about that?
Well, it was just, I remember when the war broke out, I was very excited. Because I had heard my parents talk about it, and I didn't know what it was, and I was almost happy that I will experience something that I didn't know anything about. But soon after they walked in, we realized that things were entirely different.
When you say they walked in, what did you see?
That's exactly what happened. They came in tanks, and soldiers just walked into the city. Of course, the war didn't last that long. It was about just within 2 weeks, Poland was gone. And half of Poland was taken over by Germany, and half of Poland by the Russians. And our part was occupied by the Russians.
Do you remember the expectations that your family had when the Russians came?
They were scared. They were very frightened, because my parents remembered the Cossacks that their parents used to tell them about, and about the pogroms, and about all the things they were doing to Jewish people and to women were raped in those days. But this part did not happen this time. It's just they came in, and of course the Russians have no religion, so all the synagogues had to be closed. There was no more Hebrew school, and we had to attend a Russian school. And I mean, I attended a Russian public school, and I was taught only Russian, and of course that there was no God and their beliefs.
Do you remember seeing them come in numbers,
Yes,
in tanks? And
yes, absolutely.
do you remember
Everybody,
the uniforms?
Yes, and they weren't dressed too well, They were almost like a little bit wild, because I mean wild in that respect that they didn't know the outside world, because for so many years Russia was closed in. They had no contact with the outside world, so they didn't know what was going on. And afterwards, when they started, as time went on, when some of them were talking to my parents and siblings, they told us that they had absolutely no freedoms, like even we had to a certain extent, to go out, to shop, to do things. Life there was much more restricted. But again, they didn't know any better. So they thought that's the way the whole world lived. I remember the main thing they were interested, they were buying watches. There was such a big thing to them. Apparently there was a shortage in watches there, so they were very excited about buying watches. And of course, a lot of people had to sell their watches because they needed the money to live on. Everything started to be rationed. The food was rationed, and we had to stand in long lines for bread or for any other foods. And life became very, very hard, because we just had no way of getting things, except we were fortunate enough to know some of the farmers that my father was acquainted with, and they would supply us with with potatoes or wheat and corn and eggs and maybe some poultry, which we were for which, since we didn't have much money, the Polish money was exchanged, the banks, everything else was taken away. All the Russians were confiscated, all the private business and industry. Everything was taken over by the government. So people had very little left. So the only way we could get things is by trading, giving somebody things that they wanted, that we had, and they would give us food.
What did you trade?
I don't know, whatever there was, either clothing or anything in silver that we had, like silver candlesticks, or also fabrics, bedding, anything, sometimes even pieces of furniture, whatever there was. I mean, jewelry,
Did the Jews feel that this was aimed at them, that there was a separation of the Jews from the Poles?
No. Not when the Russians came in, we didn't feel that. We just felt this was their policy, that there was no private ownership of businesses. As a matter of fact, they took every business was taken over by the government.
Pole and Jew alike.
Absolutely, yes. Everything became national property.
Did that change the feeling that the Jews and the Poles had towards one another, now that they had a common enemy?
I don't really know. Not really. I mean, they didn't like, well, no, on the contrary. They said all the Jews were communists. They said that we welcomed the Russians because the Russians were not against us specifically. So their feeling towards the Jews did not change.
Did it in fact become worse?
I really wouldn't know. It was certainly not on the open, because there were no more signs that Jews and dogs are not allowed here, because they couldn't do it. So it was, in this respect, we felt that we were equal with them.
Did the Jewish people in the the synagogues you said were closed, but even in their homes, band together to plan, to think, to help one another?
The Jews?
Yes.
In what respect?
To help one another plan for the future, or...
We couldn't plan for anything. We had nothing to... We lived from day to day. That was the only way. You know, when you don't have food to eat, there's not much planning that you do for the future. You are just happy to survive, to be able to feed the family, and to have some clothes to put on, and that's about it. Because if you had two coats, you sold one or you traded it for some food, and that was about how life went on in those days. And we thought, we didn't think it was good, but we didn't think how good it was until the Germans came in. And then we realized that again, that life was much better. At least we were not afraid of losing our lives when the Russians were there. Some of the Polish people were even taken away to Russia, to Siberia. But at least they were not murdered. Some of them died there, but they were not shot, unless perhaps some that were politically involved in things like that, which I don't know. I didn't know anybody like that.
Were holidays continued, celebration of holidays continued?
Oh, yes.
They were then continued in the home?
Yes, not like before, but we still celebrated the holidays as much as we could, because that is something that it was not really forbidden, but it was not officially accepted. So that part we continued in our home. We continued keeping kosher, and there was not that much to eat, but we continued to celebrate as well as we could.
Can you tell me how the Russian schools were different from the Polish schools?
They were actually about the same. Except that religion was not taught in the Russian schools, but the teachers we had Jewish teachers already then, and we had Russian teachers, some that came from Russia, and And life, when you're a schoolgirl, you don't worry about too many things. You just worry about your homework and doing well in school. So life for me was going on as normally as it could. And having parents and somebody else to worry about the major things, I realized that I didn't have too many problems as far as the Russians were concerned. Being there, it didn't bother me that much because I continued my life going to school.
With Mrs. Miriam Rabin.
In June 1941, the war broke out between Russia and Germany. And within a few weeks, the Germans occupied our city. And this, unfortunately, was the beginning of the end. The Germans walked into our city, and the first announcement on the main square was, within 5 minutes, there should be no Jews around here, in German, of course, And little did we realize how bad things were going to be. And it was almost from the beginning that they told all the Jewish people in town we had to wear white armbands with the blue Star of David on it. Even children had to do it. We were unable, again, to get any food or anything that we needed. And right in the beginning, they caught several people and started beating them, only because they were Jews.
Where were you at this moment? How did you learn about this beating?
From my parents and from everybody knew about it. That word spread very fast, that somebody was walking on the street and a German passed by and noticed him walking there, and he told him not to walk on the main street, and immediately started hitting him and told him to run. I also remember that there was a small synagogue near us. There was the big synagogue and the small one. And there was a very pious Jew with a long beard. And I remember one incident that I'll never forget. It was a wonderful, wonderful old man with a long beard. And several Germans came over. He was walking there, came over, and I don't know, they must have had it on them, and started cutting his beard and told him to dance while they were doing this. And of course we were all afraid from that time on, to gather outside. If we had to go someplace, it was always just looking around from all sides. The Germans used to come into different homes. They came once to our house. They went through everything, through the closets, looked all over, and whatever they wanted, they took it. They took it with them.
How many were there who came to your home?
There were 2 of them. They didn't need too many. They had no resistance from anybody. And I remember my prized possession. I had new skates that I had gotten before the war. And I remember the German that took my new skates, and I was standing in the corner and crying because he took my skates. And they took whatever there was in the house that they wanted.
Do you remember
and just
what else?
walked out.
What else did they take?
Not offhand. By that time, I don't think there was that much left anymore in the house except the necessities, because we had to trade things during the Russian time. But I think what they took is mostly like silver and clothing or things like that.
When they marched in, when the Germans came in, were you in your home? Did you
Yes.
see tanks come? Do you remember
I
seeing
don't-
the difference, the different signs of the German army as opposed to the Russian army that had been there just before?
Yes, the Russians were more out with the people. They wanted to talk to people. They were friendly. Whereas the Germans, maybe because we were Jews and they didn't want to have anything to do with us, I know that the Jewish people did not go forward to make conversations with them when they were walking around in the main square or on the main street. As a matter of fact, I recall there was one considered before the war a wealthy Jew, and he got all dressed up. He didn't like the Russians because they took everything away from him. So naturally he thought, here come the Germans, they are going to give his businesses back to him. And he dressed up and went out to welcome them. And when he went and introduced himself to one of the Germans, all he did is beat him up. So he realized that this was not what he was hoping for.
Did you see acts of brutality?
Oh, yes.
Would you-
I experienced it myself. First of all, Jews had to, they formed like they were smart to have Jews, get Jews to come to work for them. So they had a Judenrat, and people had to report for work there every day. And they would choose as many as they wanted to and have them go to different places, do different things. One of the things that they did in that was in 1942. That was on a Friday. I recall it just as if it was yesterday. They requested that all the able Jews should come in a certain area, and they will pick as many as they need for work. And I still can't understand why, but I went there with my cousin, no one else from the family. We were the representatives. And my cousin said, it didn't sound good. But she said she was a medical student. So she says, oh, we won't even go into that place. We will go in. She knew some nuns at the hospital, which was nearby. We'll go in there and we'll hide there. So I went with her. But as we were walking, this was in the outskirts of the city, we saw everybody, all her friends and my friends and so many hundreds of people walking to that area. So she says, well, everybody else is going, we'll go there too. The area that we went to, those were the barracks where it was from the time of the Polish army was training there. That area was bombed during the war. And so most of the buildings had no windows. And the bombs did not destroy the building, but they fell outside in that area. So we all gathered there, and when we got there, they separated men from women. And what they did, they asked us first to line up in pairs, and we were walking around in that square, and there were lots of Germans there. And they told us to line up, to walk, then they told us to run, and as we were running, they were constantly hitting us. And then they made us go into the building, which had no windows. And there, for whatever reason, we all assumed that they wanted records of where to send us, what to do with us. They took our names and age and profession, everybody's. You know, there were women, there were young people, there were youngsters like me. And when they were finished registering several hundred people, and as they were doing this, they were taking out 10 people at the time. Out of that, it was a big hall, 10 people at the time. And we heard shots. But no one wanted to think in a negative way. And this kept on going for hours. And I was standing with my cousin, and we were like more or less towards the end of the line, not quite at the end. But the less people remained after they were taking out 10 people at the time, the more we could hear that each time they took out 10 people, there were 10 shots. And I don't know why, but I sort of separated from my cousin, and I was getting more and more towards the end of the line, until, again, I can't understand why, but something told me that things did not sound good. And, you know, the window, imagine like a window with a low windowsill. I jumped out of the window. At that time, the Germans, when there were just a small group left, they weren't watching as closely. By the way, I think they were all drunk. It was a very cold day, and I think they probably had to be drunk to be able to witness these things. There was one German that knew me because I worked in one of the places where he was in charge of. And he came over to me and he said, "Unfortunately, my child, there is nothing I can do for you. I can't help you." And that may have given me some clue, I don't know. But I jumped out of the window, and they weren't watching as much because there were not that many people left. They were just standing in groups talking to each other, and I started running. And they must have noticed me, and they were shooting after me. So I went down on the ground, and they must have thought that I was dead. And I just crawled on my stomach across the field because I knew from not too far from there was a Gentile family that lived, that were friends of ours. And I crawled, I don't know how long, how far it was. I mean, not that far, but I came into their house. They let me in. And I was hysterical. And I told them immediately that they killed everybody. And I don't think they believed me. Even though they heard the shots, but they didn't believe me that I didn't see it, but I heard it. And I had the feeling that that was done. So anyway, I got a note, and I didn't know what was going on in the city, what happened to my parents and my siblings. I got a note, and he took it down, went into the city to my parents to see if they were alive and if it was all right for me to come home. And he came back. I don't recall whether it was my father, either my father, I think, came back with him to take me home. And they said it was quiet in the city. They didn't know anything, nothing. They had no idea. There were 2 other people that escaped that time from that group. I found out about it already after the war. I didn't know these people, and I don't know whether they're still alive or not. But people found out afterwards that I was there. And when I came home and I told them what had happened, they thought that I was just scared and I was a child and I didn't know what I was talking about. As a matter of fact, I even remember that I was called, the rabbi of our town asked me to come to him, and he questioned me. And all I could do is tell him exactly what happened, and that I heard 10 shots, and that I don't know what happened to these people. Everybody for the longest time thought that most of these people, since they were all young people, that they were taken to concentration camps. As a matter of fact, the men they chose the capable ones and they took them to a nearby camp. The ones that they felt were too old or too weak, they shot on. There were big ditches there, and some of the men had to cover the ditches after the people were killed right in front there and fell into these ditches. It was a military base, so they had these ditches dug during the war. Some of the men came back during the German occupation from some of these camps, but no one ever heard anything about all the women that were killed that day. And they estimated that the total of the women and men that were killed that day were about 800.
Your cousin was one of those?
My cousin was one of those. My friends, all people that we knew. But no one believed that they would take young, capable people and kill them. They all thought they must have taken them up someplace to the front, to either for the soldiers or whatever. I mean, everybody wanted to believe in something, but not that they were actually killed. Unfortunately, when the area was occupied again by the Russians in 1944, they uncovered these ditches, and all these corpses were there. They were looking for me. I found out afterwards that they wanted me to, the Russians, I don't know, they wanted me to testify that I was there, and I sort of, in a way, witnessed this whole thing. But at that time, they didn't even know whether I was alive or not. Because what happened when the Germans came in, we were told to move into another city, to a ghetto. And that was when all of us, we had to leave whatever we had, our home and everything that was in it, and just take our clothing and some bedding and go into another city, which was about 10 kilometers away. The name of that city was Tluste.
Now, what was the time lapse from when this incident happened to the time that you went to the ghetto?
I think it was a year later.
It was a whole year later.
Yes.
Did your family believe your story?
Oh yes, they believed. They knew me. They knew that I wouldn't make up a story like this.
And did it affect their behavior?
Well, they were just very upset and very frightened because they knew that things did not look good, and that things could only get worse.
Did they have any idea at this point in time what was going on in the minds of the Germans, what the intentions?
Well, there were no newspapers, but rumors were going around about concentration camps and about the Germans wanted to eliminate all the Jewish people. And there were people that were coming into our town during that time from Hungary who were considered Polish citizens, but they have lived all their lives in Hungary. And they were telling us what was happening in Hungary and also in Czechoslovakia.
Why did they come to your town?
Because the Germans made people that were Polish citizens, even though they lived in Hungary, but they were of Polish ancestry, even though they were Jewish. But let's say if their parents were born in Poland, then they were considered Poles, even though they lived in Hungary for many years. They had to leave Hungary. It was just to displace the people from their homes. And that's why, we were getting a lot of bad news from all over, but still in all, no one was willing to believe it.
What was your father doing during this period of time of the German occupation? He was not able to go to work, to his business.
No, of
that
course
was
not.
Closed.
That was closed. Even during the Russian occupation, he couldn't do that. He worked. He was working as a watchman in some factory. No, he couldn't. There was no private enterprise at all during the Russian occupation.
What kind of work was your mother doing?
She was a housewife.
Was she sent out to do some work too?
No.
She was allowed to stay home.
Stayed home.
And
yes.
your sisters and brother?
They were sent to do different.
What kind of? Excuse me. Go ahead.
What kind of work? Cleaning, and mostly, I really think, basically doing cleaning places for the German offices, and that's about it, I would say.
And
or working in kitchens, you know.
what work did you do?
That's what I did. That's what I did. A friend of mine who was, you know, she was a couple of years older. We worked in a, this was a, it was like a club for the Germans. And there was a Polish man that was the cook, and he was very nice to us. We used to peel potatoes, and he used to give us the potato skins to take home. And that's what we used to cook at home, and that's what we used to eat at home. Or if he made fish, and he would have the bones taken off, you know, he would give us the bones that we would take home and make like a fish soup or whatever, because to get food during the German occupation was very, very hard.
Did you know any of the people who were in the Judenrat? Did you know them
They were all-
personally?
Well, I didn't, but yeah, I mean, there were people from our town. These were people that were assigned by the Germans to supply to them the Jewish workers, to do for them the dirty work. You know, and
What was the
That's
feeling
all.
towards these people?
not very good, not very good. But when you think about it, they tried to save their own skin. And actually, they had no choice. Eventually, they didn't save their own skin either, because they killed everybody. When we were in the ghetto, when we moved to the ghetto from Zalestyki, this Polish family, the farmer that was very nice to us, he came. It was, the Germans always knew when the Jewish holidays were, and they always picked the right time to do the worst things. So we had gotten an order that within 10 days we had to leave our city and go to the ghetto. So we had some relatives in the town where the ghetto was. So they had a small house, so we were going to share with them. We were going to get a room there, and my sister got another room. My brother and sister remained in the town. And when we got there, my father said they had in the ghetto, they had several times what they call Aktion, which meant that the Germans were just going around and collecting the Jews and either put them on a train or took them to some place and had them shot. And they had one like this, and I remember that was the time when I had typhus. I was very sick. We had built in the attic of that house that we were staying a false wall, so we were able to hide there and pretend like this was the end of the attic. And I remember it happened while I was sick, and it was on a Friday night, and several hundred people were taken out of the ghetto. No one knew what happened. And since that time, my father said that he thinks it would be best when it comes to something like this, that we should all be in different places. He said, maybe somebody will survive, because if we'll all be together and they catch us, that'll be the end of all of us. And shortly after that, I was told to go to a farm which was nearby, to work there in the house of the German family that lived there. And I didn't want to go away from my family, but my father felt that it was better if I go. And he said that we should be in different places in case something happens. And that's how I wound up in the camp, and they remained in the ghetto.
How did it happen that your sister and brother were allowed to stay in your hometown?
Because for a while they said they needed some to remain there, workers. And they were chosen.
They didn't elect to do it.
Of
They
course
didn't
not.
choose to do
No,
it.
no. They were told to stay there. And that's how they remained there.
So that was the
And
first separation of family
That
members.
was right. My sister and brother remained there. And my older sister with her husband and child and my parents and I went to the ghetto. Then I went from there to the camp.
Okay. Mrs. Rabin, you said that there were 10 days notice that you would be removed from your town to the ghetto. Would you tell us what those 10 days were like?
Well, everybody was trying to find a place where to go. And of course, we were wondering how to get to the ghetto. But in this respect, we were fortunate enough to have this man, the farmer, who offered to come and take us there by horse and buggy. And the 10 days were actually up on Yom Kippur. And I remember vividly that he came in the evening. It was like for Kol Nidre. And my parents took some of the things that they were able to take with them, and he took them to the ghetto. And he came straight back there in the middle of the night from there and took the rest of us, my sisters and myself. And we packed up the rest of the things that we took with us. And I remember we passed by the main street, passing a church. There was a clock on this church. The clock struck 12 as we passed by. And every year on Yom Kippur, at 12 o'clock, it's like something, like a knife. It just, I'm usually in the synagogue. I never even look at my watch. But when it comes 12 o'clock, somehow automatically I look at my watch. And it happened to me a couple of times in the synagogue that I passed out. The night before, that was the last time my whole family was together. After that, we were never together again. My sister and brother remained in Saloshteki, and the rest of us were in the ghetto. And we were there for a while before I went to the camp, Tulisovce, which was not a camp yet at that time. It just started. And a few, I don't know, months later, they had another akция in the ghetto, which meant, you know, they just gathered people wherever they found them, and they caught my father, and he was the first casualty of the family. And I know he said before that if he could give his life for everybody else, he would gladly do it. So he was the first one.
How did you learn about that?
Well, the place where I was not too far, and people were going back and forth, you know, walking. You know, it was only 10 miles. And we knew what had happened. And I got to know, my cousins came to the camp afterwards, and they told me that my father, they caught my father, and they took him away. I mean, we still didn't want to believe about the terrible horrors, and we thought that maybe they took him to work someplace. And so my mother was left with my sister and brother-in-law and the baby. But shortly afterwards, they also found out that my sister and brother from our hometown were also taken away. And I remember that time, my mother, I came back from the camp, and my mother said that she didn't want to live anymore because, you know, when she knew that her children were gone, my father was gone. And I remember crying and saying, "But you have me. I'll take care of you when I grow up." I also, well, they went on living in the ghetto, and this farmer was just wonderful. He used to come at night into the ghetto and bring them food. That's the way they survived there.
What was the ghetto like? How many people were there in the ghetto, would you imagine?
It was not walled around, you know, but it was just a designated area of homes where the Jewish people were able to live. So they knew exactly where the area was and that everybody was there, and you couldn't, and you had to wear your armband, so you couldn't get into another area without being seen. And if you took off the armband and you were caught, you were killed right on the spot.
Now, in the ghetto, was in the home of your cousin, was your cousin's family?
Of course.
And your mother and the baby and your sister and brother-in-law.
Right.
Now, what would a day be like when you first arrived in the ghetto? What would each day be like?
Just mainly worrying about how to get something to eat, and trying to get some wood to cook something. It was mainly a day of worrying about how to survive physically, and just keeping your eyes and ears open to see if there's another akcja coming, if the Germans were in the mood to gather some more Jews and to do whatever. Because they set up more camps within the vicinity. This was an agricultural area, and there were a lot of big landowners. Some of them were Jewish, some were not, and all the land was taken away from them. So that's where they set up the camps. And each of the camps they were not too far from each other, and they were all, and these people were working in the fields, or they had cows producing milk, and these were called Arbeitslagers.
Was there any celebration of Jewish holidays in the
Oh
ghetto?
no, nothing like that anymore.
No daily prayers said, and keeping kosher was impossible.
That was completely out of question. There was nothing to eat. I mean, it was kosher because there was nothing available. I mean, if anything, it was either flour or milk, or maybe a couple of eggs here and there for something, some vegetables, like during the summer maybe. But there was no meat. I mean, that was completely out of question. So as far as this is concerned. And I remember being kosher even when we were still in our city, and when this Polish cook gave me a plate of soup, and I was very hungry, but I was sitting in front of it for about an hour and debating whether I should eat it or not. And finally, the hunger was stronger than and I did eat it. I was afraid that something would definitely happen to me if I would eat something that's not kosher. But
like what?
Oh, well, that was a soup that I knew was not kosher,
Yes.
But I was brought up in such a way that, I wouldn't even think. And I remember he was very nice. He says, "Go ahead, eat it." He says, "Your parents won't mind if you tell them." He says, "I'm telling you, they won't mind," because he knew that I was hungry.
Do you know, in fact, where your sister and brother were taken?
No. I have no idea what happened to them.
And do you know where your father was taken at that time? How long had you been in the ghetto when your father was taken away?
Not very long, only a few months, I think. But I know that my sister and my mother and my nephew were killed in the ghetto.
How do you know that?
Because my brother-in-law survived, and he told me this, that there was an aktia. They took him all together, and they took him to the Jewish cemetery, and the man had to dig a big ditch, and they shot them each individually, and they had some of the Jewish police gathering the Jews and bringing them to that place. And he told me afterwards that they were killed there, and he said that they even told him that the children, they said, weren't worth a bullet. So they threw them in alive. After that, I didn't want to live anymore. I had nobody left. But the only way I went on, I suppose, because we all felt that yesterday it was them, tomorrow it will be us. It was just a matter of time. And it was a matter of time because they started liquidating all the camps around us. And we would have been like next in turn. But it seems that it was already in 1944 that the Germans started losing the war, and they started to withdraw, and they just had to run. They didn't have enough time to to kill us in the camp. So some of the people were hiding, and some of the people from the camp were killed by the local people, by the local people that lived there.
Did you witness any of that?
No, I just saw some bodies on the street. I didn't see them, the actual killings, but I saw bodies on the street in the camp.
You were now at this time working out of the ghetto?
That was in the camp, yes. I was not in the ghetto anymore. I was already in the camp.
Where were you living?
Oh, they had barracks. They had barracks there, and I was fortunate enough to live in. There was a Polish woman who worked there as a cook, and she liked me, sort of took a liking to me, and she asked if I could be her helper. So I was able to live in that in the house where she lived, where she was a Polish woman, where she had a room, and there was another Jewish girl that were helpers. We were cleaning and helping in the kitchen. So we didn't have it as badly as most of the other people.
But at this point you knew that your whole family was gone.
Yes, yes. And I knew that it was just a matter of time for us too, because we heard all the rumors from all the places around us, and we knew that sooner or later they'll come after us too.
Who were you close with at this time?
Well, there was one, a Jewish woman who also worked in that kitchen, and I became. She had her parents yet too in the camp, and I became close with her. And with her, the last days when those were the worst days when the Germans left and the Russians weren't in yet. That's where the local people killed a lot of the people from the camp. So there was a Ukrainian family that was very nice. They befriended us, and they let us hide during those days. And
where did you hide?
You know, like it was. They set up the corn husks in such like they outside. So they in stags, you know. So they took out some, but they're like pointy this way. So they took out some inside, and that's why I went inside. At first, we were in the attic, and there was grain there, and there was still some Germans left, and apparently they were told, or they were just went from one house to another to look for Jews hiding there, and I was in the grain, covered with grain, and they went with the bayonets to see if there was anybody there, and by some luck they didn't find me, so they left. So they got scared. They didn't want me in the house, because this way, if I was outside of the house, they could say that I went in there by myself, and they had nothing to do, because chances were that if they would find out that they were hiding me, that they could have been killed too.
Were you in the attic alone?
With the other woman. Oh. And they used to bring us up at night. They used to bring us up something to eat. They were very nice people. And then I went hiding outside. That was for several days. Just like this, sitting in one place without moving.
What were your thoughts?
I don't know. I don't know. I just figured, I thought, why am I doing it? They are going to get me anyway. It was just, I guess it's the instinct for survival that made me do it. And then this woman came and said, the Russians are here. There are no more Germans, the Russians are here. That was in March of '44. And I got out, and there were a few other people. And sure enough, there were some Russians that came into the village. And so we left the village, and we went back to the town where the ghetto was. And again, there were some that were hiding, some survivors, and we all gathered in a few houses that we knew were Jewish homes, and we just wanted to be close to each other. And it was just a matter of a few days, and it was early in the morning. One morning, there was a knock on the window, and there were the Russian soldiers saying that they are withdrawing, that the Germans are coming back. Well, some people went back into hiding, and we decided to go with the Russians.
You were now 15?
Yes, that was 1944. And several of us, I mean, a whole group, and the Russians were going with the tanks. There was a terrible blizzard, and we didn't have much clothing. And we had, I remember, rags around the feet and some torn shoes. And we were walking behind the tanks. And at one point, I think they let us get into the trucks that they were driving. But the Germans were bombing the whole area, except that the snow was coming down so heavy that they couldn't see where they were throwing the bombs. So fortunately, the bombs exploded in other areas. And the Russians withdrew to, I don't know how many kilometers it was, but it was to another city. And then they went forward again and pushed the Germans back. So we remained already in that city, the other city, and that city was Warszów. That was another city which was not too far from Tluste, which was the original city that we went back to after the ghetto, after the camp.
How did you decide to go with this group rather than to hide?
Well, I had no place to hide. I mean, this was just, I couldn't hide. I couldn't pay them anything. I had nothing to pay them with. They knew that the Russians were coming back.
When you say they, who was they?
This family.
Jewish?
No.
Polish.
The Polish family.
Mm-hmm.
I know they were Ukrainian, Polish, and they were just good people, But to hide on a permanent basis, it never even occurred to me, I didn't know what was going to happen, how much longer the war could be going on. So we just decided, knowing what the Germans were doing and knowing what the Russians were doing, we certainly chose the Russians. That's what we said afterwards, that we were very happy that they liberated us, but we were even happier that they let us leave Russia when we were able to get out and naturally to be able to come to the United States, or some people went to Israel. I mean, that's another story.
Do you remember specifically the people whom you were with at this time?
Oh,
who
yes.
they were made up of? Can you tell a little bit
Yes,
about
yes.
who they
This
were?
was one. One. It was a young woman and her parents, and we sort of stuck together. And their name was Katz. And we stayed together in Borstorf, and that was the time when the Russians occupied again this area. And after the camp and after what we went through, we figured we now had a chance to live. And that was the worst part, the realization that now I could live, that I had a chance to live. That was a very, very bad thing for me, because as long as the Germans were there, I knew that it was just a matter of time. But when the Russians came back, and I knew that I had a chance to live, that was the worst time in my life. But I guess it's human nature, and the will to live goes on, and it was just like from day to day. I started working there in an office, and as a matter of fact, I started writing a diary even about that. And that was under the Russians. You know, things were not great, but we were not afraid of our lives. And we found out who survived, who didn't. There were many of us that remained single people.
Did you still have hope that members
Somebody,
of your family had
yes,
survived?
for a while I was hoping that maybe somebody was taken to a camp, because they started talking about people having been sent to different Arbeitslagers. But then, of course, 1945 came, the war was over, all the concentration camps, and still for the first few years I was still hoping that by some miracle my brother will appear, or my sister.
Did you look for them?
Well, they were in those days, when I left Russia for the displaced persons camp in Poland. That's another story. There were lists of survivors all over, and I registered, so my name was displaced all over, and even in Israel. That's how the only other survivor from our immediate family was a cousin of mine in Israel, who was there since before the war, and that's how she found out that I was alive.
What about your brother-in-law?
He was also taken from an Arbeitslager eventually.
So he did not survive?
No, nobody.
Whom did you live with when you were in
Well,
this camp? You stayed with his family?
Yeah. After the war,
yes.
when the Russians came in,
yes.
I stayed with this family, and we became very close. As a matter of fact, this is how I came to live in Kansas City, because of them. They had a daughter who had left Vienna during the war, when Hitler came to Vienna, and she was in Kansas City, and that's how I got to Kansas City when I came first to the United States. But that's, again, another story, quite a story.
You said that the time after the war was the most difficult time for you.
Yes.
Can you say some more about that? Who was there to lend you support, to help you?
Nobody. Nobody, because the person that I lived with, she had parents, she had sisters that were here in the States, and I didn't want to impose my suffering on anybody. I couldn't talk about my feelings because it would maybe sound like I was jealous. So I just kept everything inside. Until finally one day I decided to write down everything. But that was very difficult. It was very difficult. It was just emotionally very, very hard for me. So I wrote for a while and then I stopped. And I lived with it until I realized that now that I have a chance to live, I have to make the best of it. And
What did you write in your diary?
I actually tried to write about the things that happened chronologically from basically from 1941, from when the Germans came in. I didn't write anything until about the time from 39 to 41, because after living through this time, the period from 39 to 41 under the Russian occupation was paradise in comparison.
Did you write events or did you write fears?
Both. Both. I wrote about some of the events, and I don't think I got too far because I was getting very emotional and very upset when I was recalling all these events, and I had to stop. It was just more than I could take.
Did you recall events that you have not spoken about here on this interview?
No, I don't believe so. I didn't write too much because I just had to stop. Now I think I'm telling you everything.
Interview with Mrs. Miriam Rabin. We're now at approximately 1944,
That's correct.
and would you tell us what life was like there? Continue with that.
Well, it was hard because it was the realization that I had now a chance to live, and but I didn't have anybody for my family, and that was very hard. And of course, I was sort of hoping that maybe somebody will appear out of nowhere and say, here I am and I'm alive, but unfortunately that never happened. So we lived under the Russians. There was quite a group of survivors from different cities, from different areas in Borschtov. And we got an announcement that all the Polish citizens that are willing to move to Poland can do so. So we all decided to go, because we figured since Poland was more or less a free country, that we would be able to see what the world is like. And that happened, of course, after the war was finished in 1945. And through the American Joint Distributions Committee, we were able to reach the Polish city of, I believe it was Breslau. And from there we were registered to go to either to Israel or to the United States, wherever we were able to go. But before that, we had to get to the American zone, which was in Germany. And this was quite a complicated thing. We were taken to Prague, and from there we had to smuggle at night through the border, and there were American trucks waiting for us to take us into the American zone. And we were taken from there to a displaced persons camp. And there we actually were able to get a lot of information. There we found out about all the other camps that were, by meeting people that were survivors from other camps. And we were also able to register, since I didn't have anybody in the United States. I only remembered that I had a cousin in Israel. So I registered to go to either country, whichever one will come sooner. Of course, there was no Israel yet at that time, and there were quotas, and so I was able to go to the United States, even though I didn't have anybody. But the Joint Distribution Committee made arrangements for us. By that time there was a group of us, boys and girls under 18, which was the age, it was considered underage, and they paid all the expenses and made all the arrangements for us to be able to come to the United States. Well, the family that I was with during the war and after the war, I believe I mentioned they had a daughter. One of the daughters was in Panama and one was here in the United States. And when they wrote to her that I was coming to the United States, they were already well established here, and they said that they would like me to come to live with them. Well, I arrived in New York in December 1946, and I remember we were all in one big place, and some of the people had relatives, so they went to live with their relatives. But the ones that didn't have any, like there were people coming and looking us over and just adopting us, sort of, not officially, but they would come over to me and say, well, we like you, and would you like to come to live with us?
Was this in New York?
That was here in New York, in the Bronx, yes. And I'm very friendly with one of my friends who was adopted. She was not adopted, but she went to live with a family, complete strangers. And that's what would have happened to me, except that I felt I didn't know any of these people. And since this family, whose parents I knew already, and her sister in Kansas City, they wanted me to come to live with them, I figured I had nothing to lose. I'll go to live with them. And of course, we had social workers that were telling us, that were talking to us. And this woman was very nice. She said, look, we'll take you to Kansas City. You'll have a social worker there. And if these people are not nice to you, or if you don't like each other, we'll place you with another family. And that's exactly what happened. I arrived here the 20th of December. I was in New York here till December 31st. And December 31st was my first flight to Kansas City with the social worker. And the gentleman and his son were at the airport to pick me up. People that I never saw. Of course, with their son I couldn't communicate because they spoke only English, but he spoke German, and of course I spoke German, so we were able to communicate. He also spoke Polish, and I went to live with them. And it was the most wonderful thing that happened to me. I owe them what I have, what I am. I asked them why they did it, why they took me and they treated me like their own child. They had two boys that were younger than I. And they said they were fortunate to leave Austria in time. They left in 1938. This was already 1947. And they were well established. And they said, because they're so grateful, it could have happened to their children. If something would have happened to their children, they would have wanted, to them, they would have wanted somebody to take care of their children. And they were just wonderful. They knew that education, school was very important, even though I was willing to go to work. But they insisted that I go to school, so I learned fast. I had no choice. The boys spoke only English, so I learned English. I went for a few months to 8th grade. I went through high school. I got my high school diploma. I even went to junior college. And I worked part-time, and I used to babysit, and they just gave me so much encouragement, and that's why I'm so grateful to them. But and I had a wonderful home and security and everything, but by that time I was getting to be 21, and you know, and I had my friends that I came with. Some of them were here in New York, and we were corresponding, and I knew that they had a social life here, which I did not have in Kansas City. When I went to school, everybody was younger than I. And even when I met somebody that was older, they seemed so immature to me. They were so childish in their behavior and and everything, that I just had no desire to go out with anybody there or to socialize. I had girlfriends, but that's about it.
How were you received by the school community?
Wonderful, wonderful. Oh, they were so nice and so helpful.
Did they have you speak about your experiences?
Not much, but they knew about me. In those days, there wasn't much talk about what went. They just knew that I was an orphan, and that I survived the war, and that I came here, and that was about it. How and why, you know, about camps and these things. And I don't even think I would have talked about it, because I didn't talk about anything for many, many, many years.
The family with whom you lived didn't ask.
They left it up to me. They tried, but I couldn't talk about it. And I don't know why, but I just didn't want to impose my suffering on anybody else. I felt I went through it. It is my pain. I have to keep it to myself, and no one else should share it with me. And that's why I never talked about it.
Was there any opportunity in the synagogue to
In Kansas City?
Yes.
Nobody talked about it.
Did you then renew a Jewish life?
Oh yes, in Kansas City, yes. These people, they belonged to a synagogue. We used to go for the high holidays, and they were vegetarians, so naturally it was kosher. But in those days, we didn't talk about anything like that. It was just trying to get on with life, and the idea was to forget about the past, and life must go on. Of course, you don't forget. You just put it in back of your mind, and you go on living, because you couldn't live thinking about it daily, and it just, that was the only way to do it.
What were your dreams like? What did you think of your future now that you were in a home and the war was behind you?
Well, I saw that there was a future now for me, but at the same time it was always missing my family. It was always there. I remember they were so wonderful, and they used to have, they had a lot of friends. And I remember one day they had company, and I just wouldn't come down. I would just put my head in the pillow and cry, because I just couldn't. I was begrudging myself having it so good, and was always wondering, why me? Why did I survive? They were so much better, so much smarter. That's something that I could never figure out. But I guess must have been a reason.
Did you come to any reason?
I think so. My husband, my son, my grandchildren, they made my life worthwhile living. And that's why I'm telling this story, so that they should know that I owe them a lot too, because otherwise there would have been no reason for me to live. Yes.
So, in your letters to your friends in New York,
Oh yes.
What were those letters like?
Well, they were writing me about themselves, how much they enjoyed themselves. One of them was working, they were going to night school, and they had lots of friends, and they had also mostly European friends that they felt they had more in common with. So I came to New York for my vacation, and I was just overwhelmed, and went to the Empire State Building and went sightseeing, and I was just so impressed that I went back to Kansas City, and I said, I'd like to move to New York. Well, of course, they were very upset, especially the gentleman, Mr. Rappaport. And he said, didn't we treat you right? What did we do? He was very upset. But she was very understanding, and she said to me, I understand. And she said, if you were my own flesh and blood, I couldn't stop you from going. But I want you to know that the door will always be open, that if you don't like it, you can always come back. What happened, I befriended two sisters in the DP camp, and we came to the United States together, and we were like three sisters. The two sisters and I were like three sisters. And one of them, the older one, got married, and the other one, the younger one, remained living in a room. So there was room there for me. So when I was here on my vacation, I stayed with her. She says, why don't you come and live with me? And that appealed to me very much. And this is how I decided to go to New York. But of course, our relationship with the people, my relationship with the people in Kansas City, grew even more after I left. I used to go there to visit, and they would come quite often to New York. And with the two boys, I was their big sister. They became my family. They were another reason for me to want to live. And I kept up with them until she passed away only a couple of years ago. Fortunately, one of the boys also died. He was 50 years old. But the older son is living in New Jersey. We are in touch. We communicate. We see each other. He's not too well, but we get together for happy occasions. Their daughter got married recently, so we were there. And we just have a very good relationship. Good relationship with the other son's wife and their children. They are my family.
What kind of work did you do in New York?
Oh, I worked in an office. I did some bookkeeping type posting, that type of work.
And whom did you become friendly with?
Here in New York?
In New York.
Well, I had my two friends, the two sisters, the one that was married, and the other one also got married shortly afterwards. I was in New York only for a few months before I met my husband.
Will you tell us about that?
Well, that was very interesting. This was one of the two sisters had a party one evening, and she decided to invite me too. She had some of her married friends, and I met them, of course. And one of the couples, he said rather to my friend after the party, he said, your friend is a nice girl, and I have a nice boy, a friend who is not married yet. Would she like to go out with him? And when she told me about it, I said, and at that time I was going already with somebody, but I wasn't too sure about it. So I said, well, your friend seemed very nice, or his friend must be nice too. And he called me, we went out. I never saw the other man again, and that was it. We met March 17th, and we got married that year in December. So I wasn't really by myself in New York for very long.
Did you find that the people you were driven towards were people who shared the same background that you?
No.
Shared a European background?
No.
No.
No. Not really. Not really. Because even though my husband is from Europe, but he was not in a concentration camp, and his story is completely different. He was he spent the war years in the Philippines. He was a prisoner of war there. But most of our friends, even now, are not survivors. I have two of my old friends that are survivors. One of them that we came over together. My other friends don't live, the two sisters, they live in California. They've been living there for many, many years. But no, I did not. As a matter of fact, I tried to avoid meeting other survivors because I did not enjoy and did not want to talk about my past. It was something that I completely wanted to put in back of my mind. I felt it's not for myself, because in my mind it was always there and always will be, but I just did not want to impose my feelings. I wanted to Americanize and to live as normal a life as possible. And that's why I felt that being with people that were not survivors would give me a better opportunity for that. And it did.
Do you still feel that today?
No. But I still don't like to sit around and talk about it. With my friends, we talk more now than we did for years. We talk about these events that are taking place now. We talk about the museum or the video, the videos that are being made. I had made one years ago at Yale. I remember our son was at that time at Yale, a student. He was studying for his PhD, and he came home one day and he said he met this lady who does video testimonies of Holocaust survivors, and he told her about me, and she asked if I would do it. And of course I said right away no, because I never talked to him about it. But I thought about it. And a couple of weeks later I called him and I said, ask her to call me. And she did. And we set up a date and I went down because I felt that he may have wanted to know and that I should do it for him. And so I did. And I made a tape there. It was for him mainly. I wanted him to know something about my past, about which I couldn't talk. I just remember one day there was an article in the magazine section of the New York Times. It was written, I don't recall whether I think it was by a survivor, telling about how the parents of some of the children were making them feel like they owe them something. In other words, they were saying that in the article that the children say, my parents always tell me how hard their life was and what they went through and that I have it so easy. And they also said the parents tell them these stories that give them terrible nightmares. They were telling them about things that were happening in these cars where they were transported to the camps. And these children were saying when they are on a subway and they feel pushed by people that they get that same feeling. And I remember asking my son to read this article. And I said, when he finished, I said, am I like that? Am I doing this to you? And he said, no, not at all. And I also remember that day, it was in the morning, he was still asleep, but after reading that article, I got into the car and I smashed my car, which wasn't so funny, but I was just so nervous about it that it affected me. But I didn't want to impose my suffering on him or anybody else. I just felt that whatever happened to me just has to stay within me. But now I feel differently. I feel that I have to tell my story. I have to tell it for my grandchildren. They should know what happened. And hopefully it will never happen again. No one should ever have to experience anything like this. And that's why I think the story has to be told, to watch out for signs, because there were signs, I suppose, in the 30s, and people just ignored them. I guess they didn't realize that this could happen. And so it happened. So hopefully this will never happen again. And this is what I try to tell. I've had an opportunity to speak to some of the children at the Hebrew school of our temple. And I just conclude my little story by telling them that if anyone ever tells you that the Holocaust never happened, you tell them that you met me and that I'm a survivor of that. And so I hope that this will serve for the future generations, as be a lesson for them. And it will never happen again. And there should be always peace.
Is the lesson, who is the lesson to? Is the lesson to those who are also possibly the targets of the Holocaust, as well as those people who are the enemy?
Well, certainly, first of all, the enemy, because it does not lead to any good. First of all, it's to the enemy. They should never even have